Good day and welcome back to the fourth webinar in our six-part series on artificial intelligence in the security domain. Once again, I'm Dr. Nate Allen, Associate Professor of Security Studies here at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. I lead our work on cyber and emerging technology issues, and I will be moderating today's discussion. This webinar is entitled AI Applications in the Military and Security Domain. In this session, we're going to build on our previous discussion of good practices in the development of AI security strategy and dig deeper into some tangible use cases. As many of you already know the Africa Center, just a reminder, these webinars are informed by the Africa Center mission of expanding understanding, providing a trusted platform for dialogue, and building enduring partnerships, and providing strategic solutions to Africa's security challenges. For more information, please visit our website at theafricacenter.org, which my colleague Dior has linked in the chat. One of the first and I think best use cases we have of artificial intelligence in the national security domain comes from March 2020, when it was reported that a Turkish-made Kargu-2 quadcopter attack drone engaged forces belonging to the Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar as he retreated from Tripoli. This reportedly attack occurred even as the drone lost connectivity with its operator. And though some details about this attack remain murky, including whether it resulted in any casualties, though it is pretty strongly implied by the UN report on this, it has been contended that this is the first use case that we know of an autonomous weapon in combat. The Kargu-2 is marked by the manufacturer, the Turkish company STM, as coming with quote-unquote automatic target selection and facial recognition capabilities, meaning that it could have used AI-enabled image recognition capabilities to sense and engage its target. 5 years from that attack, it's been 5 years now, and it is clear that this was not the last attack of this kind, and that we live in an age where warfare is becoming increasingly autonomous, and that this is having profound consequences for the nature of warfare in Africa and beyond, and that advances in artificial intelligence are kind of one of the key drivers of this increasingly autonomous nature of armed conflict. And where yesterday we provided you with maybe some useful tips about how and whether and under what conditions to begin thinking about adopting a strategic framework for artificial intelligence in the security sector, I think one of the things we established was that this framework will have to contend that there are both, I think as the example I just alluded to illustrates, very compelling use cases that provide a very clear military advantage, but also very compelling potential consequences and risks and questions. And while we're going to cover the risks a little bit today, but more in subsequent webinars we're going to do in a couple of weeks, we're going to focus on strategic objectives and use cases for which your security forces might want to employ artificial intelligence this morning. And specifically, we have three objectives. We want to provide an overview of the way in which military and security sector actors are employing or likely to employ AI to achieve their security objectives. We want to kind of bring up and evoke specific examples of how security forces across Africa are using AI for applications such as intelligence, surveillance, targeting, information operations, and decision support systems. And finally, we want to discuss some of the barriers to AI adoption and use in African militaries and security forces. And here with us today to discuss these AI applications, both in defense and law enforcement, we have two very highly distinguished, experienced panelists. First, we have Dr. Sam Segun, who is a senior researcher at the Global Center on AI Governance and an associate research fellow for artificial intelligence research at the University of Pretoria. He has published widely on AI, data, and computational ethics and technology policy. Um, and as an AI innovation and technology consultant for the UN Interregional Crime and Justice Research Center, he has developed a toolkit for AI innovation in law enforcement. Um, we also have with us Dr. Moses Khanyile, who is the director of the Center for Military Studies and the Artificial Intelligence Research Unit at the Faculty for Military Science at South Africa's Stellenbosch University. Um, his expertise includes defense strategy, value extraction, and executive project management, and he has extensive experience across research, government, and private sector industries. This, of course, makes him ideal to ideal to help lead the Defense Intelligence Research Unit on AI, which is the first of its kind in Africa. So, welcome to both of you. We are absolutely delighted to have the two of you with us today. Moses, let's start with you. Um, in thinking about how South Africa is deploying or thinking about deploying artificial intelligence in its defense sector, I'm sure you have carefully studied and thought about how it's being used elsewhere across the world. So, if you can kind of review for our audience, how do you observe other countries, both African and non African countries, applying artificial intelligence in their security sector?
Thanks a lot, Chair, and good day to everybody around the virtual table. Indeed, AI is a very complex topic, especially in the military, a complex and sensitive topic in the military environment. But to your question, one thing that we should always be aware of is the fact that the private sector is leading in this space with or without the support of government. But in almost all the countries that government plays a very crucial role in many ways by way of providing legislation, a policy framework, funding incentives, and creating conditions that are conducive to AI development. So there is some kind of public-private partnership that is happening in most countries. So the level of involvement of government varies from one country to another. But to your question, I can provide look at it from two angles or two baskets. The one basket is off the battlefield kind of application, and the second basket will be in the battlefield or in deployment areas. Starting with the one on in the actual off the battlefield. AI is very crucial for purposes of improving productivity for the armed forces in many ways by automating a lot of regular administrative and management responsibilities, things like inventory and stock management, getting to know how much of each item is there, and as the stocks get lower, when to replenish them, and in some cases also to determine disposal cycles. It is also crucial for purposes of decision support. You know almost that there's a lot, in most cases, the defense force is in different countries or different regions at any given point in time. And there are matters of human resources, there are matters of force structures, there are matters of force design, R&D, and even long-term planning that need to be made. And all of those require a lot of brain power. Time is always not on the side of the commanders, and with the AI support or AI-enabled resources, it is possible to do those with a relative speed. Training is another area. Simulation of certain scenarios is another area, which enables the defense force to save a lot of money while enabling its soldiers to acquire skills and reach a certain level of proficiency with little resources or not a lot of money being used. Now, the interface between the armed forces and its suppliers, the defense industry, is also quite crucial, because it's not uncommon that the defense industry produces something that is not really usable in the operational environment, or there was a misdefinition of requirements from the defense forces side. So with AI, they have real-time or near real-time interface that enables them to work together. So in terms of issues of adjustments of lethality, in terms of range, all those technical aspects can be taken care of with relative ease. And also matters of interoperability between different military items that can be taken care of through proper integration with the defense industry. Similarly, the same applies with regard to other law enforcement agencies, both inside the country and maybe on the borders. We are all aware the role of military intelligence. They are permanently scouting for information, trying to collect information, analyzing, synthesizing, creating a big picture. All of that requires a lot of resources, and with properly structured AI tools, it enables the military intelligence services to do their work a lot easier and smarter and quicker at a lower cost. Another element, Chair, that I think is crucial in the battlefield space is smart procurement. Nowadays, when doing procurement, there's a lot of things that needs to be considered other than just the right price, the right quality, and all of those things. You want to know if these things can last long. Are they interoperable with amongst itself, especially amongst different domains, that is land, air, sea, space, and even cyber. So it is important that when you conduct procurement, there's a certain level of certainty. Obviously, as much as AI provides enables military forces to do their work easily and with more efficiency, but it also opens them to all kinds of vulnerability. So AI could also help with matters of cybersecurity, matters of cyber resilience, especially after an incident of cyber attack. But in the battlefield, in the deployment space, it is very important for purposes of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, what is called ISR. So here we're talking about domain awareness, the eyes and ears for the deployed forces. Things like the changes in weather, the changes in topography, the troop movement, the enemy movement. You'll have seen what happened in Ukraine, the issue of not being able to have eyes on the ground, which would negative impact. Obviously, in deployment or in the battle space, navigation is important. as well, knowing where the troops are, where they want to go, and also for purposes of replenishment. Command, control, and communication is another element, creating a proper battle visibility for those in the battle environment and those that are in the bases, especially for the commanders. Now, Chair, you did indicate that you know the use of drones, especially in terms of target identification, selection, and engagement, is actually part of AI capabilities. So when it comes to weapon systems, especially uncrewed vehicles across all the domains, at sea, on land, and everywhere else, it is important that if you have AI-enabled assets, you can do so much more. Some of the countries, some of the armed forces, and in fact, let me say most of them, they would love to have a better sight of what's happening on their borders. So border control, surveillance of what is happening there is important. But the issue of force design, the issue of configuring, of being able to configure your military force in a manner that says you need so many of the sharp end, so many of the support end, is done much, will be done much more efficiently if you have access to AI resources, because then you can see the interfaces between the different arms of the military force. And obviously, there's a lot of debate underway as we speak around the issue of lethal autonomous weapon systems or the laws from different angles. I know you said, Chair, you're going to be looking at the risks as we move forward at other sessions, but those are very much top of mind, as you are aware that even the UN has recently taken a resolution to look into this aspect through Resolution 239. That would be my input on that particular question, Jen.
Thank you very, very much. You highlighted, I think, one issue that I think is important for kind of countries thinking about adopting AI strategy to consider, which is that AI is very useful not just for kind of weapon systems, which is where I think a lot of the media attention is, but
Yes.
also in all like the really important kind of logistical work that goes into structuring and managing a military. So things like you mentioned, like predictive maintenance, like force posture, like potentially simulating conflicts and those kind of things, a situational awareness. Those are all, I think, much less controversial uses, but also I think importantly for maybe African militaries, also potentially cost saving if you're kind of thinking about how you might want to deploy AI. So kind of to further that point, I imagine you're also thinking about what, if anything, with respect to the application and adoption of AI might be specific to the African context. I think one of the issues that came up that we've talked about over the past few webinars is the fact that most African security forces militaries aren't necessarily adopting their own AI, and there's this kind of dance you have to, as you mentioned, there's this dance you have to go through with the private sector, be it a foreign company, or I know South Africa is one of the few countries that actually has its own kind of defense industry, but there's still a sense where they have to be able to kind of meet your military kind of requirements through whatever kind of algorithm or AI system that they're procuring. So how do you see this kind of playing out? How do you see other countries kind of across Africa kind of managing some of these issues in context specific ways? How are they applying artificial intelligence at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels?
Yeah, look, one can't say with absolute certainty, but there are certain things that are given in many areas, especially in the African context. Firstly, it is important to remind everybody around the virtual table that armed forces are actually a macrocosm of the societies from which they come. So the material that you get for your armed forces comes from the same community, and the kind of challenges that the community faces might also be reflected or transferred into your armed forces. So it is very important to recognize that first. And then when we say, therefore, that the military is not totally insulated from what is happening in the society, and therefore, if the country does not invest enough in its own people, by way of education, focusing on STEM environment, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics environment, you might have a problem in terms of having sufficient material that can understand, that can work with AI tools. At the same time, you also need sufficient physical infrastructure that enables all these tools to do what they need to do. Where so many countries are battling with data centers. Most of Africa does not have 100% coverage in terms of energy supply. Um, Digitalization is still a very big challenge, as you're all aware, or as you might be aware. Sub-Saharan Africa has got less than 5% of digitalization coverage. And especially when we look at the internet exchange points and data centers. Recently, South Africa got some kind of investment from, or a promise of investment, or a pledge from Microsoft, as an example, of 5.5 billion in data centers. Whether it's going to materialize under the prevailing circumstances, it's something else. But you need infrastructure, you need a certain environment. Now, in Africa, there are big ambitions to embed and adopt technologies, which will then filter through to the armed forces, starting with the AU's continental AI strategy that is talking to big things about peace and security. But ordinarily, one would expect the defense forces in Africa to focus on getting to do their routine jobs done easily and efficiently. In other words, focusing on productivity, focusing on training and simulation. But also, you also aware that instead of getting these expensive missiles, ballistic missiles and so on, that are way beyond range of affordability for African countries, uncrewed vehicles are offering a better and cheaper and practical, versatile option. Instead of a few paying millions, it's a few thousands of dollars, and they can disrupt whatever is coming their way. We're also aware that the barriers of entry into this space are much lower, which means, therefore, that even non-state actors are likely to keep these armed forces busy. And therefore, a lot of investment has to go into preventive, defensive kind of technologies. Now, I've already mentioned the issue of structuring internally, in terms of how do they configure themselves in a manner that is efficient. Because in future, you might find that you're not going to be needing so many warm bodies out there on the front lines, but more of these technologies deployed to be eyes and ears, and also to disrupt whatever is happening on the other end. Smart acquisition, for me, is very crucial, because this ties up an armed force in to a very long relationship with suppliers, some of whom sometimes go under, some of whom switch sides in terms of alliance, and others get prohibited by way of sanctions and so on. So it is important that they plan these things they have the tools to plan their requirements on a long-term basis. Therefore, dealing with capability lifecycle management from acquisition to usage to maintenance, overhaul, and repair MRO, and up to disposal. AI could be very helpful in that space.
Thank you
Thank you.
very, very much. Yeah, I think you highlighted kind of two kind of significant issues, like one which came up a little bit yesterday, which is this need for, if you're going to employ AI, needing to have some kind of supporting or enabling infrastructure in terms of data centers, connectivity, a wireless connection, like that kind of being a prerequisite. But also, on the cost side, I think the proliferation of unmanned systems in particular, driving. I mean, the thing is, AI in unmanned systems is usually at a minimum used for navigational purposes. It's not necessarily being used for targeting. It's being used to sense and understand the environment. It might be being used to communicate with other systems. But as you pointed out, those are proliferating at an extremely rapid rate across the continent right now, including a number of unmanned systems that are being produced in Africa. I know, like Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan are all producing their own unmanned systems. I assume many of which have AI-enabled navigation on them. So I'd kind of like to end this on a discussion of your experience, kind of leading what I sense is a pretty innovative unit in the South African Defense Forces. So how is the Artificial Intelligence Research Unit you're leading kind of collaborating with the South African Defense Forces to apply artificial intelligence? Kind of what do you think other countries might learn from this, the effort to kind of apply research to kind of the application of AI in the military and security domain?
Yeah, this is a very tricky one, Chair, very tricky in the sense that, as an academic institute, DAIRU, its core function is basically academic research, teaching, learning, and teaching and learning, and then also dealing with social impact issues. But obviously, when it comes to research, we have a pure academic research in its traditional sense, and also applied research for postgraduate students. And this is where it gets a bit interesting and much more complicated. Now, for us to be able to do what we are supposed to do in terms of our mandate as DAIRU, we're operating in the defense environment, in the security space, which means we require access to defense personnel now and then. We require access to defense systems, to defense facilities. So we can't do what we need to do from an academic perspective and research and perspective without the blessing or the support of the South African National Defence Force. So we have secured a partnership and that ensures that we are a trusted partner, which means that the Defence Force now has access to defense-related programs, and AI, but also our researchers can go to the defense facilities, engage people, look at certain items for research purposes. But it also complicates matters because now we have to navigate a whole bunch of policies, legislation, and both at national and international level, and at the same time comply with the university's policies and on academic integrity. Now, We also know that there are international treaties which talk to non-proliferation, especially of certain sensitive information and technologies. And if we don't comply with those, we will be accused of being reckless and non-compliant. So some of the things that we believe maybe our counterparts out there on the continent might look out for is that armed forces are by nature very conservative, and they are very cautious of anything that they are not too knowledgeable about, especially when it comes to AI technologies, because they might see you as a spy or working for somebody or things like that, penetrating them. Therefore, as a result, you need to go through a particular process to gain their confidence. You know, most that most of the time they interact with the industry, but the industry are more practitioners than actual code academic partners. So when they looking at institutes like DAIRU, and they've gained confidence in them, then everything changes, because we're not into profit like the industry, so we're not costing them anything, but they want to see what kind of research that we're doing for their own advantage. Now, knowledge sharing platforms like seminars, like conferences and things like that are also quite beneficial, because then they create some kind of confidence, some kind of relationship and rapport between the armed forces and the research community. Now, in our case, where our institute is part of the Faculty of Military Science at the university, which is the only one of its kind. There's no other Faculty of Military Science in the country. So with the DAIRU, our research unit, is a natural home within the faculty, which makes it easy, therefore, to deal with all the requirements that the Defense Force requires. But I can also advise that maybe it is always prudent to provide training to the executives. That is your generals, your admirals, and senior managers, so that they understand what AI AI can do for them, what it is about, and therefore what kind of investment and planning they need to make in order to capacitate the Defense Force.
Thank you very, very much. And I think, you know, what one of the things I think is really fascinating and important about kind of your work is it kind of attempts to bridge what I think is a pretty big gap between the expertise you have in managing and using AI systems increasingly at the operational and tactical level, with the need for, I think, kind of researchers to try to understand what some of the broader security implications are of AI and think about how to kind of develop negotiations, rules, norms, general conclusions, kind of understand the broad strategic implications of AI use. So it's a very important and kind of fascinating collaboration. And thanks, I think, for kind of comprehensively summarizing for us, I think, what some of the main use cases of AI are in the military domain for South Africa and maybe for a lot of the countries that are tuning in today. Sam, let's bring you in, and I want to broaden this conversation a little bit to talk more about from the use of AI for law enforcement purposes, which I think may be a little bit more widely understood than its military use cases, in part because it's been around for a bit longer. So how are broadly how are African law enforcement agencies applying artificial intelligence to track criminal threats or to enforce the law?
Thank you, Chair. It's good to be here as well. This is quite an interesting question because the applications are far-reaching and it's a wide range of areas to apply. And particularly, we've seen the use of AI in the environmental protection, particularly so law enforcement groups that track and combat environmental crimes. We've also seen it being used for counterterrorism. We've also seen it being used by police for things like surveillance, for crime tracking and prevention and prediction as well. And in Africa, much of these applications, we've seen this extensively gaining traction amongst African law enforcement agencies. Particularly the concern that has slowed the pace in which this technology has been used have been privacy concerns, the issue of accuracy and bias, which are, issues that cut across several applications of AI technology. African law enforcement agencies that we've seen, particularly those in the tracking environmental crimes, we've seen a surge in these and sort of the impact it has had. I'll give some examples. So the Tanzanian Singati Grumeti Reserve, I think it's a natural reserve. They use an AI application called TrailGuard. So TrailGuard technology was deployed in its pilot phase in 2018. And it resulted in about 30 arrests for 30 poachers and the seizures of almost 600,000 kilometers of illegal bushmeat during its East African testing phase, which is a significant improvement in expediting the work of the environmental protection agencies. And the technology itself, TrailGuard, is an end-to-end, camera-based technology that is designed to help with wildlife conservation and also promoting human-wildlife coexistence in a way that supports conserving the natural reserves of Tanzania, at the same time also ensuring that they're not exploited. There's been other use cases, particularly in Gabon, in collaboration with Nigerian institutes and that in Cameroon as well. They launched something called Operation Pangolin in 2023, with the goal of supporting the Gabon's national agency or national parks. The idea of that is to build an imagery or an imagery and spatial monitoring and reporting tool to help rangers and park patrols to be able to predict the poaching of pangolins and about there's always sort of like an intersection where you find criminal organizations who come in, work with locals as well to be able to poach in this case and to capture pangolins and use them for international, smuggle them internationally. So this collaboration has been able to help between not just the law enforcement agencies that are focused in the conservative space, the conservation space rather, but also other countries across the borders. In the maritime space, for surveillance particularly, we've seen African countries use a technology called Skylight, which offers maritime data and able to do with AI-powered pattern recognition, computer vision, and getting data from the satellites. They're able to identify ship movements on sea. This is being able to help detect illegal fishing and also help with combating piracy to an extensive level. The tool helps to alert coast guards, and other maritime enforcement agencies that we see suspicious vessels on the water. This is currently being used in Madagascar, Kenya, Gabon, and much of the country in Nigeria, much of the countries in the Gulf of Guinea. At the moment, about 70 countries plus get to use Skylight as AI tool. They used to track sort of illegal activities going on the sea. There's another AI tool currently being used, and we've seen this being used by governments like Ghana, governments in Ghana. We've also seen this being used in Nigeria. It's called Digital Earth, where they take a vast amount of data, of geospatial data, and they're able to translate and analyze this data. And with that, they're able to monitor satellite images and gain insights from that to be able to identify and track illegal minings going on in remote areas of the country. So they pick data like surface level artificial ponds that have been dug, or the clearing of vegetations to create access roads to these unlawful or illegal mining sites. And this has been particularly helpful for these countries to be able to track this illegal mining of natural resources that also tends to exacerbate existing conflicts, because then it's a conflict of based on resources. It morphs into ethnic conflict as well, and it's important to be able to leverage such technologies. And like I mentioned, Ghana, Nigeria, we've been seeing much of this, and Sierra Leone is opting to join the digital earth ecosystem to use this technology. We've also seen growing, the use of it's called Africa Regional Data Cube, and countries like Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Ghana, Kenya, Senegal have been able to use time series to be able to geocode certain locations and analyze data through an online interface. And this one is particularly used to not just tracking the mining sites, but also tracking the routes of illegal mining operations within the country. Nigeria, in 2019, its Economic Financial Crimes Commission explored the use of artificial intelligence software for tracking organized crime through money laundering and terrorism financing. And this is partly done by its enforcement of a digital ID linked to the banking accounts. There's certain thresholds and limitations put on this account, such that when people tend to transfer a particular amount that raises suspicion, it's investigated further, and they're able to track where the finances are going into linked accounts and how these accounts are in operation and the location of the people who operate these accounts. We're also beginning to see, the identification of anti-money laundering and anti-money laundering on the continent in collaboration between law enforcement and banks. For instance, ABSA uses an AI tool called Symphony AI for predicting anti-money laundering operations or money laundering operations, and it reduces false positive by about 75 to 77%, which says a lot about how these countries integrate, how the law enforcement integrate with the financial services industry to be able to ensure that money laundering is curbed. We've also seen applications, for instance, facial recognition. A new phase was used by the Zimbabwean police to help apprehend Chinese syndicates attempting to defraud the government by creating fraudulent documents. In Uganda and South Africa, there's been a surge in opting for digital IDs and biometric tools, including facial recognitions and others, to be able to track theft, fraud, and also theft of internal terrorism. In Togo, for instance, biometrics will be used for electoral registration purposes, which is sort of an improvement of what had previously been done. And this was also used for other things, as also tracking social welfare scam, because the government used those biometric data to be able to transfer cash to people during the COVID-19 pandemic. Kenya, through its National Integrated Identity Management System, has also been gathering biometric data, although this poses, of course, privacy concerns, but it also helps the government to sufficiently be able to track crimes and be able to identify where they go from there. Nigeria, Ghana, Morocco, Malawi, and I think Zambia as well are some of the countries also opting for surveillance tools and surveillance technology to be able to help them track crime, help them predict where the patterns of crime, and also to be able to keep monitoring on criminal activities that go on in the country. Lastly, I'd like to mention the Interpol face recognition system, which is provided by IDEMIA. And these contains facial images or face images from more than 170 countries. And this database is made available to Interpol member countries that can also, take this data or search this database when there's a crime and they need to ensure that they're able to identify who the person is.
Thanks. That was an extremely comprehensive, kind of long list filled with rich examples. Kind of, thank you for that. I think each of your examples, I think, in various ways, really highlighted the power of AI pattern recognition plus computer vision, right? Where you take something like, here's what we know what a poacher might look like, and you install remote cameras around a trail and have pictures taken of passersby, and the AI can automatically identify potential poacher. Same thing with that could be a potential poacher, that could be a potential suspicious looking ship, that could be an access road that it resembles those kind of used by illegal mining operations. And you can do things like, look at where illegal transactions have occurred, or near where the mines are, and predict potential routes that the smugglers are using. So it's clear that these are very, very powerful tools for especially intelligence gathering that I think save a lot of time and a lot of resources if employed if employed well. Um, I think you've also made clear that not only are the use cases of AI in law enforcement very widespread, but that the technology is evolving pretty rapidly. So, kind of in your view, what current or potential future uses of AI for law enforcement purposes, or even broader purposes, are likely to be the most disruptive? What should those kind of watching this webinar maybe think about preparing for?
That's an interesting question, Dr. Nate. I mean, like I mentioned, there are several use cases we could look at. The one that probably bothers me a bit more is predictive policing. So predictive policing, although we haven't begun to see it in effect in Africa, we've seen a part of it being used in the security and defense sector in South Africa. So South Africa has got very robust security industry. And so the private sector plays a huge part in this and predictive policing for me is one of the most disruptive I worry about the most, because this will involve using vast data set to forecast crime and crime hotspots and identify potential offenders. For those who have watched the movie Minority Report, you might have an idea of what predictive policing looks like. So by uh, you're able to identify what the potential crime could look like, what the potential hotspots could look like. In a sense, police today already do some kind of predictive policing. They're able to say, no, this is a crime hotspot, so they're likely to be an increase. And so what that would mean, it helps the police in deploying more resources to that area. So there's more crime that happens in an area. It means that we need more police officers in that area. It means that we might employ some innovative way of addressing this crime, such as community policing, creating more community centers to engage the young people of that place to reduce crime in that area, and to get very noble distractions, get them involved in sports, increase educational spending in that area, increase access to public healthcare services as well, increase opportunities for job creation and the rest. And these are all intertied. So predictive policing does appear to be like a very, very important space to look at. And I mean, what I'll do is when I mention one, I'll tell you some of the concerns I have. So one of the concerns about this is it could reinforce existing biases within the criminal justice system. I mean, we've seen examples like this, like in the United States, where there have been over-policing of minority and areas as well. And we've seen where such tools used to predict recidivism have been used in the criminal justice system to predict who are likely to commit crime. In some cases, there's a tool called Compass, and I'm sure some of us on the panel here have read those examples. And Compass was used to predict how likely someone was to return to jail. And it turned out that pre-existing biases that were in the criminal justice system played tremendously in the predictions. So in cases where a person who was minority, in this case a Black person who had never committed a crime, was not a repeat offender, was predicted to commit more crime in a short time, and the person never did, whereas a white person was predicted to not go, they were not likely to commit a crime, and then they did almost immediately. So these are some of the concerns of predictive policing that it could, entrench existing bias. We also seen facial recognition on the continent. However, we haven't explored its its destructive potential yet. So I mean, this real-time facial recognition that could be used. This could be used with police body cams. We haven't even in many African countries, body cam is not being worn by the police. So imagine if we have real-time body cam analysis with facial recognition enablements that would play create an exponential growth in tracking of crime and other things. We've also seen the concern that would pose. We've seen this elsewhere is the issue of accuracy, particularly for people with color. We know the facial recognition technology, particularly at the moment, particularly not very accurate when it comes to identifying people of color. There's also issue of misidentification, which you've seen use cases elsewhere in the world, particularly in the US. Another potential area for disruption is on data analytics and crime analysis. That is a unique area that I think artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning platforms or software will be able to do great work in. And this could be able to would help with crime reporting, with connecting with social media. We'll be able to use that to identify patterns and connections between posts people make on social media. Could be posts of terrorist groups, it could be posts of extreme groups. And this could be done by just identifying the patterns in which they write, syncing things like natural language processing, and predicting how they write or compose propaganda messages or misinformation, and be able to use that to track. So data analytics and crime analytics, another area. Now, the challenge that will pose again is issue of data privacy, which people would have, and also the automation bias, where there's over reliance on the prediction, which could also be false. Then we also have automation of administrative tasks. One of the pushbacks in the project I'm working with Interpol and Unicre, one of the pushbacks we see for policing organizations or policing agencies is the fear that when they employ a new software, it will increase the administrative tasks. And so, like, if they have to use facial recognition software, it means that they'll be held more accountable. It means that they'll have to fill lots of paperwork, and there'll be paper trails that would increase their burden, which is a concern for many policing officers. But with AI, we're able to see that there's a potential for automation of administrative tasks. This could be things like reporting, evidence analysis, record keeping, even freeing up officers, time to allow for, critical to focus on critical work. The potential, concern here would be things like, disrupting job disruption. So we might find some job displacement, as you will in other areas where AI automation is. And also there might be fear of dependency, so that when there is a technical failure, for instance, it becomes a challenge for the police to carry out their duties. And lastly, I'd like to mention digital forensic. So AI-powered tools that can be used to analyze digital evidence, through smartphones and computers. They make it quicker for police to be able to carry out investigation, and they're able to analyze large volume of audio, of videos, and this could sync a lot with digital identification that many African countries are trying to put in place. The potential challenge of this is that at the moment, most criminal justice systems in Africa do not still recognize AI-generated evidence, for instance, and this could be considered inadmissible in court. So there might have to be some work around legislation to be able to enhance the use of this type of tools.
Thank you very, very much. So I think what I take from that is that AI is a very, very powerful tool, but it's also it can be a bit of a black box. And one of the dangers is we're becoming more and more reliant on artificial intelligence, which just you basically, be it image recognition, computer vision, pattern recognition, you're basically saying, here's what a criminal looks like. Here is some, here is something that's predicting recidivism. Here is something that's predicting terrorism, and asking a large language model to kind of find sort of like cases. And when you do that, as useful as that can be, you often don't know exactly how the algorithm you're using is making that decision. At least not without being very careful about how the data set you're feeding it is structured, those kind of concerns. And I think there's this fear that I think you've kind of nicely articulated across all the cases, that kind of the more and more we become reliant on LLMs to make kind of these decisions for us, rather than kind of trying to get an understanding of how they're being made based off the data that's underlying them, kind of the more kind of risks there are that we're actually making kind of poorly informed decisions. So final question for you, and then I'd like to get to Q&A. I see we already have a bunch of questions in the chat. And we're going to delve into this a little bit more deeply in the next webinar, but given that this is sort of the core area of your expertise, you've done a lot of research and work on the practical and responsible adoption of AI in the security contexts. How can African military and law enforcement think about responsibly adopting artificial intelligence, bearing in mind what I think you've laid out a compelling case for its clear benefits, but also potential risks?
All right, that's a very good question. So I think there's the two approaches to it. One is to have it as an afterthought, which is what we're currently seeing, where we get lots of African countries who buy these technologies off-the-shelf tools as software by technology companies without necessarily having the right, regulatory framework around how this is used or deployed, or without necessarily considering how disruptive this particular tool is. And so in cases where we're seeing like autonomous drones being used, there have been errors in many cases, in cases where the Nigerian military, for instance, mistook a small community in a remote area, mistook that to be terrorist gathering, and that led to bombing the place and killing over 100 people. There are cases like that that abound, and this usually because the regulatory part of it is an afterthought, or the ethical part of it is an afterthought after they buy this technology off the shelf. One way to do it, I think, or the right way I would recommend that it should be done is to come up with these legislations, or these regulations or policies, or create what is called a regulatory sandbox. Okay, we could test this in a smaller environment, and test the effectiveness of the regulations around it, because that would be useful. Another way we could build this responsibly is to leverage open source models. So the challenge with relying on buying them from vendors or buying them from technology companies that work in this space is that there's highly sensitive data is shared with this company. The company would have to carry out maintenance, sometimes upgrading of the software and the rest, and this presents its own security challenges or intelligence challenges for these countries. So it's useful to leverage open source models. Open source models are more transparent. As new versions come up, there's improvements in its auditability. So these models are able to be audited by external parties as well, which is very important. There's also we also want to look at things like creating guidelines for the security and defense industry. So how do we regulate private sector actors, and what roles the private sector actors have in using these technologies and creating these technologies? Are there certain technologies we would want to prohibit, say lethal autonomous weapon systems, for instance? Do we ever want that to be the case, that we have those type of systems? These are questions that governments in Africa would need to think about, and think about how to ensure that they're able to come up with the right guidelines for the security and the defense industry. There's also the need to engage the public and civil society groups. And by doing this, you're able to tease out what the potential harm of using these systems could be. And sometimes, we are oblivious of what the harms could be. And by just interacting with people with different backgrounds, different experiences, they're able to inform how, policy is created, or how a technology is used, and certain guardrails that could be put in place to ensure that they are not misused or abused. Lastly, would be the need for collaboration internationally. So, for instance, I mentioned the Interpol facial recognition tool. That database is made accessible to Interpol member countries, and that is a reach. That's a reach tool. There's also the use of hash tool to track hash sharing, rather, to be able to track counterterrorism or fake news. It's the Internet Forum for Counterterrorism. In collaboration with member companies like Amazon, Meta, Twitter, and all the large tech companies, they work in collaboration. They're able to identify, they create unique identifiers and digital fingerprints or digital footprints to track contents across platforms. And this could help with identifying, terrorist groups and the rest. So that sort of collaboration, both internationally and with industry, could exacerbate the possibility of being able to stay ahead of the curve at the same time, maintain innovation and respect for ethics and privacy and privacy concerns and regulations.
Thank you. Brilliant. So now we will begin to turn to the question and answer period. So I think we'll have time for maybe 2 rounds of questions. So first question I'm going to ask was directed for Sam. So you talked a lot about kind of law enforcement use cases for artificial intelligence. On the other side, are there any ways in which artificial intelligence is empowering criminal networks that concerns you particularly? Next question. This I think will be for Moses, and as a warning, I will ask it both in English and in French because it was asked in French. So in French, it was comment peut-on mettre l'intelligence artificielle à profit dans la planification des opérations militaires et comment mettre l'IA dans les armes sur le terrain dans la lutte contre le terrorisme? Okay, that question was basically asking how can you implement artificial intelligence in military planning and operations against terrorism specifically. I think a major concern for a lot of colleagues. Okay, now I'm going to switch back into French. Donc, on a une question de Alain Badara Kasse, du Centre des hautes études de défense et sécurité. Donc, il observe qu'en réalité, l'intelligence artificielle militaire, comme elle était utilisée par les militaires, dépendent aux technologies à l'étranger et qui peut-être peut exposer les infrastructures critiques à des risques géopolitiques inacceptables. Donc, il se demande, dans un contexte où les infrastructures critiques africaines, comme je crois Moses a observé, les fournisseurs d'Internet d'accès, des centres de données, sont largement dépendantes des technologies et fournisseurs étrangers. Donc, quelle approche technique et stratégique pourrait un État africain concevoir un écosystème de cloud souverain capable de résister aux menaces politiques et aux pressions géopolitiques? So to summarize in English, I think the question is, if you're a military and you are dependent upon artificial intelligence increasingly for, as Moses said, both logistical support, non-defense related operations, and then kind of actual kind of war fighting, how do you, isn't being dependent on externally supplied infrastructure to use artificial intelligence, both a cybersecurity and a geopolitical risk? How do you potentially mitigate that concern? And then the final question I'd like to put to our panelists is no, actually that was 3. So let's stop there and let's go with Moses first.
Contrary to popular belief, there's a lot of goodwill out there. We have odd cases where, some countries would not release information for sharing with others, but generally, there's a lot of information that is made available through international organizations like Interpol and so on. So With AI, there's a need. I'm not. There are very few countries. In fact, I can hardly mention any that is not part of international structures like Interpol for purposes of sharing key information, criminal activities, trafficking, transport, and in national. Um, my view is that obviously, if the country does not have any resources at all, it has to rely on whatever is made available out there. But from a counterterrorism perspective, as Dr. Sam has indicated, um, you can have access to real time or near real time information at the press of a button, which will enable you to identify potential terrorists, potential movement of money, funding terrorism, odd activity in terms of travel patterns, and also the interlink between criminals and transnational criminals and terrorists, because obviously there is some kind of symbiotic relationship there. Most of these things are already bedded down by way of certain infrastructure that is in place. And AI could actually help with this. But obviously, the user interface, the skills of the users can make or break the effectiveness of counter-terrorism strategies. And therefore, it is important to invest in the skills of the practitioners, the law enforcement people, and also to have a reasonably up-to-date kind of equipment. Now, on the issue of foreign reliance, Africa, when you look at the arms supply as an example, it relies on foreign supply in most dimensions. There are very few countries with relatively vibrant local defense industries. Some countries are stronger in one area and not so much on a full bouquet of end-to-end kind of capabilities. So countries like South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria are playing at a different level. But when it comes to AI, and not many feature that high, and therefore they have to rely pretty much on foreign supported, foreign supplied kind of infrastructure. Um, and it's inherent. It's inherent in the relations on a bilateral and multilateral basis, and you can't do away with it. In fact, in some cases, the choices are sometimes not so much about which kind of technology you want to go for. It is about which country or ally out there is prepared to support you, either by way of donation or even investing in your country. That's the nature of the beast, and it's going to take us a long time before we have a certain level of AI sovereignty, let alone data sovereignty.
Thank you very much. Great answer. Sam, you want to weigh in?
Oh yeah. So I think I'll start with the question on foreign reliance or reliance on foreign technologies. Well, sadly that's the case. At the moment, AI technology is driven by a few superpowers, so the US, China, and then at the moment Europe as well. And we are lagging behind significantly, and there are a number of reasons for that. One is that internet accessibility in Africa is still below par. Africa still has, sub-Saharan Africa particularly, has the most expensive internet data per gigabyte, in fact, per megabyte across the world, which is a huge, huge problem. The other is electrification. So reliable and available electricity is a big problem in Africa. So leading to people having, auxiliary or alternative electricity sources. You need this type of infrastructure, basic infrastructure, for you to start to talk about building AI at scale. The other challenge which we have is the data availability and data quality. It's only recently we begin to hear people talk about the need for digital identification, for instance. Many African countries do not have a national database. So if you ask them what makes a person a citizen of your country, there's really no, real answer to it. So there are issues of people making fraudulent identification, and there's no proper database or centralized database to be able to cross-check this with. So this creates existing, trouble on ground. There's also the issue of AI computing resources. So to build the kind of models that we see, large language models or general purpose technologies being used, that's GPTs being used at the moment, you need high powered computing systems. In the top 500 supercomputers in the world, there's just one from Africa. In the top 500, the US has over 100, close to 170 of them alone. So you can talk about building this type of technologies without, having some of the basic infrastructure in place. But if we look beyond that, I suggested, leveraging open source technologies, because what many African innovators are doing now is building on frontier models that have been built. So they build connecting with OpenAI's API or Anthropic's API, or say working with DeepSeek, for instance, and using their API to be able to they build a front screen or a better interface around it, retrain the model on specific use cases, and so leverage on that frontier model to be able to build something unique. That is different from building from scratch, which many military would prefer to do. And so what one suggestion or recommendation would be, understanding sort of the constraints we find ourselves in, the infrastructure constraints. We'll want to focus on leveraging open source tools, and improving on those open source tools, because then you can take them off the internet and build them on-prem, create your own storage within your facilities, and be able to build your own technology using already pre-done work, and that could help exacerbate the level of innovation. The other question about how AI could empower criminal organization, that is 100% right. I'm going to share an article I wrote for the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs. And the article focused on the global security risk of open source AI models. So we are beginning to see that general purpose or, available civilian AI tools, like even ChatGPT, as innocuous and open and simple as it looks, how they are being used by, criminal organizations, extremist groups, to be able to generate false image, alter truth, create social unrest. We're seeing it in how those type of tools, and also voice cloning or impersonation tools and deepfakes are being used for cyber crime, where there's been, South Africa experienced close to 345% increase in cybercrime between 2021 and 2023. Kenya experienced over a 250% increase in cyber threats, just simply because open source AI tool, and not just open source AI tool, any available open source or any available open source software AI tool could be leveraged by non-state actors or bad actors to commit crimes. Now, there's a reason why that is the case. One is that for governments to use it, there's a more extensive regulatory process, from procurement, how the procurement process takes place. It has to follow certain regulations and policies put in place. The other challenge is that for criminal organizations, they are motivated to do that and do not need to go through any regulatory phase to be able to acquire such technologies. And not just that, it is hard generally for AI technologies to be regulated. So for the military, for instance, if a country's military starts to enrich itself with uranium, it triggers, the alert globally. There are ways that the international bodies are able to identify that a country is, enriching uranium and are trying to build a nuclear weapon, for instance. You can't do that with AI. Anybody with a good laptop can be in their bedroom and build an AI tool with online information that is made available, learn on YouTube and do this themselves. So that makes regulation of this type of tools a lot difficult. And I think it will require more collaboration between government and others to be able to tackle such challenge.
We have time, I think, for one more kind of quick round of questions. So I'll ask kind of both speakers I'm going to direct 2 questions to both of you. If you answer those questions succinctly and also provide any final remarks you want to give for us to take away from this excellent conversation, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to start with you, Moses, and we'll end on Sam. So one question we have is from what are some near future military applications of AI on the horizon? So I think Sam talked about that in his remarks. I'd be very curious for your perspective on that. And second, could you elaborate a little bit more on the existing use cases of AI models in off-battle situations to improve procurement and equipment life cycles, taking into account existing levels of digitalization? Are there any kind of off-the-shelf solutions that you'd recommend to customize, or do they have to be completely kind of developed from the ground up? And if so, what are the main challenges? So pretty elaborate question, but I think just basically more about kind of the use cases of AI in procurement and kind of what types of tools are available is how I would frame that question. Next, we have a question I'll direct towards you, Sam, from Hossam from Egypt. Is how can AI effectively detect hate speech and fake news from non-state actors, given the challenges of data scarcity, language diversity, and cultural differences? And then finally, we have a question from Paul Kabea from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He asks, can AI also be used down in the fight against corruption? Especially in cases where security services have a lot of corruption in their security forces. And I'll say it in French, just because I want to get some French language in these webinars. Est-ce qu'il peut aussi être utilisé dans le cadre de la lutte contre la corruption? Il arrive que dans les services de la sécurité, nous assistons à la corruption en détriment, par exemple, pour les autres des forces de sécurité. So yeah, Moses, we'll start with you. We'll conclude with Sam.
I believe we're first getting into that state, the most feared stage of lethal autonomous weapons, weapon systems out there. These things that can be deployed and linger around almost indefinitely, relying on solar energy to power themselves up, staying up there and dealing with targets on their own, or predetermined target, or on their own as they decide to engage those. This is the one area that is keeping the whole globe talking. As you are aware, in fact, it's just unfortunate that there isn't sufficient, as much as there is consensus around the globe as to what might need to be done in terms of compliance. Currently, the signals are that major powers are not that keen to participate in terms of regulation of these kinds of weapons. So we're going to have a big challenge. The second part is about the miniaturization of weapon system. They're getting smaller, they're getting much more versatile, and they can go long distances. in large numbers, which means they are capable of overwhelming whatever defense systems are deployed out there, and which is the biggest issue. And also taking these things into space, that is another area of great concern, where, you know, you will recall that treaties that were signed to demilitarize space, but big powers have de-ratified those, and which means that now becomes an area of big concern. If you look at the constellation of satellites out there, and whatever big countries are doing to deal with these satellites, the disruptions that they want to effect in there are a big cause for concern from a military perspective. As Africa, we don't have much activity there, but it will impact on us. Now, on potential models that could be used, AI-powered modules for procurement, I can't mention any offhand, but I'm sure that they're definitely available. In South Africa, we have an acquisition agency called AMSCO, where its main function is that of acquiring equipment and conducting R&D on behalf of the South African National Defence Force. I'm not too sure what they have in that space. But by way of final remarks, I think Prof. Allen and team, these kinds of conversations are very crucial for the African community, to as much as we don't have the resources to start our own things, as Dr. Sam has indicated, we need to form part of the conversation, contribute towards the regulation of AI, especially in the space of defense and security, because at the end of the day, those who suffer most are those who are most vulnerable, like those in Africa. So please continue with these exercises, and let's propagate this message across the globe wherever we find ourselves. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very, very much, Moses. Sam, final word to you.
So I think I'd start with a question around how AI tools could be used to detect hate speech on the internet, given the variety of languages we have. And so this is a very complex question, but I'll just run through some of the ideas that I have that I think that would be very useful. One of them is, I mean, if we build an AI tool to be able to do this, then it has to definitely be a multilingual NLP tool or NLP model. And I mean, there are a few open source versions of that out there. So there's also a zero-shot or few-shot learning approach, which is using high resource languages to generalize for low resource ones. There's also code switching detection. There's also digital slang and adaptation. So we're creating a dictionary of what digital slangs might look like. So we're able to track when they are used as for hate speech, for instance. There's also real-time translation that has been helpful, which we're beginning to see on platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. There's also sentiment analysis and context analysis that we're currently seeing more work being done there. There's also speech and text fusion, which helps. Network analysis, which help. I mentioned the hash sharing platform that many countries and companies are subscribed to, where they're able to detect, hate speech as it's shared across platforms and track the digital footprint as well. We are also able now to detect when AI tools generate, say, some particular content. If it's a deep fake content, we can detect that this content is fake as well. To answer the question on how AI tools can mitigate corruption in law enforcement. So I want to preface this by saying that not every problem will be solved with technology. Some problems are social cultural that will need to take a social cultural or social ethical approach to, whereas some will take, a a technological approach to. Body cams and CCTV analysis is one way that has been able to hold police officers accountable, for instance. And if creating whistleblower protection, for instance, also makes it possible for the process, so if a whistleblower comes up and rat out a law enforcement team, they are not penalized for it because they've got protection by the law. There's also using tools like blockchain. For instance, blockchain creates a level of transparency in its ledger that could help with, say, the procurement process in the military or in law enforcement. There's also public data access that could be created for citizens, where you get citizens' feedback and all that. Those are like very useful ways to be able to, curb excesses and corruption. Lastly, I think I just want to throw into the question that was asked around some AI models that are available for procurement. So we know that Androlis Lattice, they've got a platform. So Plantier has also got a platform for procurement that helps scale AI. Also has something called, I think it's called the Thunder Forge program that could be, just to respond to that question.
Thanks. Any concluding remarks you want to takeaways for our audience?
Oh yeah. So I mean, this has been a very lovely chat. And I think what we need to focus on more are some practical ways that we can take from having this conversation to saying how to implement them, particularly creating, I think the easiest step is to create safeguards around these things. And so we need to start talking about how we can create national strategies for security and defense. How do we stay ahead of non-state actors or criminal organizations that might be highly motivated to use AI tools to be able to cause disruptions, election manipulation, and civil unrest. So I think the focus should be on the easy steps, which would lead to creating these regulations.
Thank you very, very much. Sound advice. Stay tuned. Allow me, on behalf of the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, to thank our two wonderful panelists for sharing their insights. Our next and final two webinars in the series will occur in about 3 weeks on April 3rd and 4th, but we'll talk about regional cooperation and AI risks. Until then, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon, a wonderful few weeks. I hope that you learned as much as I did from this webinar and use this as a learning tool. Again, feel free to visit our website to see these webinar series come up and be posted. And thanks again to all who participated in the webinar.